Welcome to the AI Silicon Valley podcast, where we give you a Silicon Valley perspective of all current AI topics. We're here in Palo Alto, California. This is podcast number 20. My name is Eric Nilsson, and with me today, I have my regular co-host, Rajesh. Rajesh, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing good, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's been a little bit of time since we recorded 19, so we're back in the saddle here. It's got
know.
a lot going on.
Oh my God, I think AI is indeed very fast moving. So there's a lot of action, right? So I feel like there's so much to discuss since the last time we did this. It's been a few weeks. So
it has been, but it hasn't changed. But I've learned a lot. I've been to a couple conferences where I got some great AI sessions and some birds of a feather AI sessions. So
nice.
I got some good IT perspective of what it means to run AI in your data center and what everybody's talking about. So we'll be talking about enterprise AI, right? And
Yes.
and how that's rolling out. But before we do that, maybe we should just catch up on the news.
Yeah. I think there's a ton of stuff to talk about the news, and I think OpenAI is always at the sort of middle of all of that. So the first news item I think is just high level. Sam announced that they're going to stick to the nonprofit status, and instead of pursuing the sort of for-profit entity that they had envisaged back in December, I think, and subsequently Elon Musk, opposed it, etc.
Right.
So they're now sort of saying that they're going to do a public benefit corporation (PBC). So that's good. That's the sort of strategy.
That's interesting. And what that means for their funding and their ROI and who's putting money up. But maybe Microsoft and these guys that are using OpenAI are just looking at them as a technology provider, and that Microsoft will monetize the use of it, OpenAI.
Yeah, I mean, I think given the Microsoft Azure partnership, certainly, I mean, there's the whole rev share angle between the two, right? For all OpenAI uses on Azure. But outside of that, yeah, I mean, I think funding, they just closed a new round of funding, right? Like, so, I mean, the whole funding structure continues to be the case. I also read that they're going to uncap the profits. Like, I don't know how much we want to dive into right now.
Yeah, not
News,
really, but yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So
Right.
there was a whole question of we need to cap the profits because of AGI, and there's going to be infinite amount of money to be made, etc. So some of those caps are going to be removed. Is also something I read. But
No, interesting.
yeah,
interesting.
it's there's a
So they're still working out that model, but
yes.
now they're talking free.
Free meaning what do you mean?
Meaning a nonprofit.
Oh yeah. Nonprofit, yeah. But again, it's a complicated structure. So of course the entity is going to continue to make money, obviously, right? For sure. That seems to be the case. But they're doing great work, honestly. I mean, I think the tech that's coming out, I think there's really such an amazing arms race going on here between, I guess, Google, Microsoft. Google and OpenAI and Anthropic, I think, are the three main players on stage right now, right? That are really driving the whole conversation around the latest developments. So it's super exciting. So that's one kind of piece of sort of news. On Associated, they just another Associated news is that OpenAI announced a new hire, the Instacart CEO. Her name is Fiji Simo. I hope I'm getting the pronunciation right. But so she's joining as the head of apps, and that has some implications here. Just that announcement so tells you a little bit about their strategy, what they're thinking about, what's top of mind for OpenAI, and things like that. So I think we can do a little bit of a deep dive. They also did an acquisition, so we'll talk about that a little bit. So yeah, there's a ton of stuff to talk about. I mean, absolutely, and we can.
They're still market leading. OpenAI is still market leading, and
absolutely. I think as far as I know, the latest numbers are on again 500 million weekly active users, right? And yesterday in a court hearing, I believe a Google exec or an Apple exec, somebody mentioned about Google might lose its search share to OpenAI in the future, kind of thing. Some speculative future statement,
right?
And the stock tanked 9%, I believe, yesterday, if I'm not wrong. So
I think that's the biggest takeaway for me, right, in the last couple of weeks of just how many times me and people in my ecosystem are saying, I'm using ChatGPT now for everything. I'm not even going to Google anymore, right? Like, why go to Google? Even if I want a URL for something, right? Like, hey, give me a URL for a restaurant. Yeah. I just go to ChatGPT, like, boom, right there. Doesn't give me 500 other things, right? Just gives me the URL I'm asking for. Thank you very much, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
No, this
Why would
is
I go
this
to
is a
Google?
this is a very serious threat. I mean, and that's what I've been saying since, I don't know, a year and a half. I mean, if you look back at my LinkedIn history or like the posts I've done, I may have said something around these lines a year and a half ago. So
Yeah.
I mean, this was a bit of a writing on the wall, right? And it's coming to fruition now. So Google definitely has something to worry about.
While I was on the road I was in St. Louis, and I was just listing stuff. I was in the hotel room for a little bit, and I listened to Robert Scoble's live stream podcast where they're talking about OpenAI as well, just AI in general at JI topics, and they're big Apple fans, or they have been Apple fans, and they're talking about how your AI will become your friend, like the pet rock, right? Like an inanimate objects, you become friends with inanimate objects. The pet rock back in the 1970s in the United States was a big deal, where people became friends with their rock. Rocks. Right? And they'd feed their rock and put a little blanket on it, and it was and there's a psychological term for developing relationships with inanimate objects, and so they were talking on this stream that your phone now will, with AI, OpenAI on it now, does voice, right? You can talk to it. It's going to automatically see where you're at with GPS and know that if you transition into your office, then OpenAI can continue the conversation, and it'll just be your friend, right? And not only that, but a friend that's just brilliant, right?
And the key unlock here, honestly, is personalization, actually. Right. So the system,
the more it knows about you, knows what you're asking, knows what you're working on. ChatGPT definitely knows who I am and what I work on.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's a big one. Yeah. And technically, I believe, it's long-term memory, what it's called. So getting that right, I think, is going to unlock a whole host of use cases on the applications layer, basically for OpenAI and for others, potentially also. Right. But other people building on the API. That's a very key, I think, important thing here, I think, as well. Yeah.
Nice.
So tell us a little bit about what you Eric, you learned at New Orleans.
I was in conferences and was on the road a lot, and I got to a couple birds of feathers on AI topics. And one of the things that we've talked about before is like, what are the models? How much data is in a model? And new versions of models coming out, and how are you using GPU in the enterprise to support these models, right? And we got into the weeds of birds of a feather, talking about how much data is in a model versus how much data is in an external vector database, and what does that mean? Well, first off, the first takeaway from this, and most people listening probably already know this already, is that all the data is in the model, right? The model that's developed has all the data for that model, right? And the new versions of the model are new instances that have whole new sets of data, right? And then RAG is about teaching a vector database that's on the side, your corporate information, right? So if you have specific things about your company, your knowledge, your source base, whatever it is you're using your AI to develop code, or your support question and answer, or sales acceleration like PipeIQ, you're using the RAG model to augment a vector database, which is connected to your main model that you downloaded from Anthropic or OpenAI or Google, right? And so you have your main model has all the data, then you have your vector database that can attach to that to add your own personalization.
Right.
Got it. Okay. Where does GPU utilization actually, where does that land, right? And that's what we got into. Is like, well, you use an infinite amount of GPU to train the original models, right? So Anthropic and DeepSeek from China and OpenAI, thousands and thousands of GPUs to train that main model.
Right.
But if you don't have a lot of data, you're not doing that much RAG, you don't need a lot of GPU, right? You might have some GPU for some training, but most of your GPU utilization comes from using the model itself, or the runtime, or what we call inference, right? And inference is just when your users ask your model a question, right? So when I'm asking ChatGPT, what's the name of the restaurant, XYZ, there's some GPU that has to go through ChatGPT's whole model, take the weights, and come back with an answer, right? And that's GPU utilization, right? Well, when you start having different models in your enterprise with different workloads, then all of a sudden you got a GPU management issue, right? How many GPUs do you actually need? How many, GPUs are expensive, right? And NVIDIA is having fun selling enterprises all of these GPUs, right? But the reality is, as you get new models, spin up new models. Some models are used more, some models are used less. And so enterprises have to do architecting of their AI infrastructure, right? Which is all about GPU utilization and storage utilization and memory utilization and CPU utilization, and then of course GPU utilization. And so they were talking about the architect of load balancing your model usage or inference, or what I just call runtime, right? And it's just all about runtime, right? And in the enterprises now are busy building products that have AI built into them, whether it's either augmenting support, right, or augmenting sales, or it's part of your key feature of a product, right? You have to figure out the runtime load. It's either in the cloud or data center for your AI infrastructure, right? And so that was interesting to know that most enterprises aren't planning GPU utilization for training, right? They're just trying to calculate what's the runtime requirement to handle X amount of load for all the questions my users are going to be asking. And guess what? At night, nobody's asking questions, right? So you have peak usage times, right? What are you doing with that GPU utilization during the off hours? Oh, well, you could be doing training, right? So you have to now load balance your GPUs, which for me was interesting because, we talk about GPU utilization in AI and you think Anthropic and these guys doing these big models with thousands of GPUs. But the truth is, it's really about how much GPU your model needs to provide your users with a runtime.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you bring up a very interesting point, right? I think when DeepSeek came along and the stock market, like NVIDIA fell big time, I think, right? I think the whole thing is Wall Street analysts, right, among others, are trying to figure out what is the kind of inference demand we're going to have 2 years from now, 3 years from now, right? And so it's not just about training. Of course, there's training, right? And training is, I think, easier to predict, but inference is like a completely different ballgame and very difficult to know because, I mean, the whole notion of the G1's paradox, which we have covered in one of our previous episodes, maybe 3 episodes back, the whole point being that as your inference costs come down dramatically, the consumption is going to increase proportionally in the other direction. But it's really hard to know, right? Like what those numbers look like, because that is what is predicated on in terms of understanding what kind of earnings NVIDIA is going to have 3 years from now, or Broadcom,
right, or Broadcom, or
anybody else, right? Like any of these GPU-ish AI chip manufacturers,
right? So, and this makes sense how Broadcom is making XPUs, where they're working with Google, Facebook, and OpenAI to build AI-specific chipsets, right, for their AI workloads. And I'm like, wonder why, right? And the answer is, well, it's a runtime scale, right? Like the more users you get, if OpenAI, as you just mentioned, has what, 500 million users, and let's say that your GPU utilization for ChatGPT is 100 users per GPU, right? If you do the math, the number of GPUs that OpenAI has to have in a data center is astounding, right? I can't do the math that quick in my head, but it's like 50 million GPUs, right? And you're like, well, that's far. One thing, you can't even get them that they can't manufacture them that quick, and two, the power to use that is just that's going to be super expensive, which is why the Trump and these guys are saying, we got to build nuclear power plants. I get it now. You need that for runtime, not for training, not for making your GPU, your AI model smarter. It's just because everybody's using it, right? You're replacing Google with, a chat, and Albert Einstein, and he uses a lot of power. So therefore, making economically more efficient AI models, right? Whether it's DeepSeek that just does it with half the GPU utilization, or making a chipset that makes it 10x more optimal, right, for power consumption, because it's not a general purpose. I get where they're going now. It's all runtime. It's all inference.
Yes. I think runtime inference, I think, is going to be critical. And I was actually at a talk at JP Morgan last night, and a security researcher, I guess, Ritesh Ahuja, who's head of Walled AI. It's a startup, AI startup, and he was talking about how, I mean, there was the whole enterprise is deploying models and security privacy considerations, and how large enterprises want a separate model of their own deployed. So if they're on Microsoft Azure OpenAI, they want their own model deployed. So if you're a large financial institution, right? So
But their own custom data in it because they want
own custom data, but also your
a certain
own
way.
Yeah, your own instance of the OpenAI model, right? So
Right.
that your data is not shared with anybody else,
Right.
So
Right.
that
And that comes back onto on-prem, right? Data centers, set up data centers, bring the model in, run
correct,
it.
correct,
Right.
or even if you're going to do it
In their cloud,
in the
it
cloud,
has to
right? But it's
be
the same thing.
it has to be multi-tenants,
Exactly.
its own tenants.
It's an own tenancy with its own model. So
Right.
the cost, right? I believe just to get started with deploying a model like that is about $100,000 to $500,000, half $1,000,000 just to
Right.
get the model up and running, and then it might take you a couple of months to do the tuning. I mean, make it work with your apps, etc. But in a couple of months, you have a new model, right? Like, what are you going to do, right? Like, so there's this whole question of like very large costs. And then, as you talked about, right, there's these inferencing is done in bursts, meaning a bunch of your employees or researchers
or customers or whatever,
are using that model to understand what you need to do. So you are in POCs, so to speak, but really to go into production, I mean, I think virtualization is a nice, elegant solution or way of thinking about, sharing these GPUs across multiple things so that things don't just sit idle there.
Right. And this just reminds me of the app server days where app servers took off, Java took off, app servers took off, and it was all of a sudden, it was the workload to have in your enterprise, right? And then you were building apps with that. Now I just look at this and go, okay, the new app is an AI that you're working with, right? And you can actually imagine an AI being the interface to a lot of different apps, right? Because you just talk to it and you say, hey, I need this. And it goes, okay, let me get you this, right? Which is interesting in its own right. So
absolutely. I mean, that kind of goes into the agent sort of framework, AI agents, which we are working on at PipeIQ, right? Like, I think agents is super, super interesting. So a lot of the enterprise AI, when we think of enterprise AI, really it's agents in the enterprise. How are they going to work? What are they going to do? Right? What kind of supervision, etc., human in the loop. There's a lot of interesting sort of frameworks. But I think, so ballooning costs of deploying your own model is a huge issue. I think virtualization is a great, elegant angle there. But even more, I think maybe about how not to share data with other parties in a multi-tenant environment would be an even better solution in a way. I guess that's what sort of virtualization gets to as well.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I spent a lot of time when I was out is AMD's new chip. And I want to say they have a GPU as well, Radeon, and they got a 24 core AMD chip, right? That just has, and then they've got built-in memory, and they got a GPU. And if you just look at the amount of math that they do, and this is like a $600. You can get a $600 to $800 little machine now that has that bundle put together. I think it's out the door $800. They're looking at like, okay, how do we get mini nodes, right, that will do this, right, that'll run a model, and they've got a under $1,000 64 gig 24 core AMD with a I forget the name of the GPU. I need to look it up. AMD's GPU, AI GPU, married on a board under $1,000, and all of a sudden you're running a model just on one little $1,000 net. Like, how does that plug into the data center, right? And like, you buy 1,000 of those and plug that in, and so now AMD's getting in the race, right? And then it's software. It's like, well, NVIDIA has their software library, so AMD has to make a software library, and then how do they deliver that? But we did spend quite a bit of time looking at, how the hardware is going to play out as well to get this done, and the improvements on little machines and scaling all of that out. So interesting times.
It's super interesting times. My understanding is that AMD is definitely behind as far as sort of the whole CUDA equivalent is concerned, right? So there's the right kind of software that can sit on top of the hardware for developers to be able to deploy things quickly or make changes, etc. So that's why my understanding is NVIDIA is sort of is winning. Relative to the competition.
It is winning relative to everybody else, but then you have like Broadcom, and you have GDK Tech, micro machines that are coming in going, yeah, we can do this, right? And we can get you something for under $1,000 that'll handle AI workloads, and maybe it's not for enterprises, but maybe it's for mid to small companies that also want to have AI solutions. And
Right.
do you need to go spend that money on cloud, or can you just go get a couple, $10,000 worth of small machines and you're in the AI business?
Right, right. I think for enterprises, I think it's all about, again, privacy, security, right? Where is the data? Is my data moving, or is the again is the compute coming to the data, or is the data going to the compute? I mean, that's another framework paradigm that needs to be sort of sorted out, right? I believe Andrew Ng, the professor from computer science professor from Stanford, I believe he's saying like the whole notion of data gravity, where, right, like, I mean, data is important. Now, he's saying that data gravity is going to decrease and data may have to move to the compute rather than the other way around. So that's going to be an interesting, I think it's not entirely clear to me which way this is going. But I mean, clearly for enterprises, they want to make sure that the data is secure and is not commingled with other people's data, is not used for training, etc. Right? Like, I mean, that's the big concern with AI. And clearly that question is not resolved to any degree right now. I think for enterprises, the best option right now is either go deploy a Llama model, or, right, do a multi-tenant on Azure OpenAI, or of course, if you are an AWS customer and you're using Bedrock, you can use some of the Anthropic models, right? But I guess you're going to run into similar cost considerations. Whether if you want to have your own model, there's going to be a certain much larger cost versus using shared tenancy on the model. So.
Yep.
Cool.
And just to correct, it is a Ryzen, RYZEN. That's the AMD CPU that has 24 cores, and then they have HX GPUs. HX 370 gets you your AI married to the GPU. So under $839.
So is there a CPU component to that as well?
Yeah, the CPU is the AMD Ryzen.
Oh, I see.
Which is their 24 core. They got it in 12 core dual thread, which means you get 24 threads going, and that's their fastest. That's their fastest one out there. Just came out a month ago, right? But it's also then married with their GPU, which is AMD's GPU, which is the HX 370, right?
Gotcha.
They put that all on one little board, right? That ends up being like a NUC form factor, but that guy will run, OpenAI. Yeah, it'll run models.
So NVIDIA is slated to release something in summer, isn't it? We had discussed this one.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah. So we spent a lot of time going through that at the conference, right? Looking at the reality of building AI capacity, right? Not just on NVIDIA, but on other compute hardware with GPUs attached, and then running the models on them, runtime.
Right. Makes sense.
Yep.
I think having something that can run locally, you can see the significant benefits. But I think, if people want to experiment, just
those are just hitting the market right now, and it's creating a little bit of buzz for AMD, and then of course NVIDIA responded with their machine, and there is the how can I get $1,000 machine? I think NVIDIA is charging $3,000 or $4,000 for theirs, but it's still in the ballpark of something that you could afford to do, and we could set it here and run our own model.
But Eric, if you're an large enterprise with whatever 5,000 employees,
you
don't want somebody bringing in their own box. Like this is like almost like BYOD or something.
No.
No,
what I'm saying is for mid to small companies or engineers, they're looking to build an AI component.
Sure.
You can do that. I'm not saying I would run that I'd just go to ChatGPT personally, right? But if you wanted to create your own model, add a vector database, add your own content to it, and having an AI and put it out on the web. Right?
I see.
You can do that for under $5,000 now, right?
Sure.
Interesting.
Interesting. It is interesting. Okay, so why don't we shift gears to talk a little bit about, there's a couple of developments with OpenAI. One, we spoke about they're hiring the head of applications, the previous CEO of Instacart, right? She's coming in as head of applications. Also, they just announced yesterday also, I believe, there were rumors last week, but officially the announcement was done yesterday of an acquisition. They acquired Windsurf, which is actually used to be called Codium, right? And they bought the startup for $3 billion, right?
$3 billion.
$3 billion, right? So a very large number. and the company has been in existence only for about 3 years. So this is code gen, right? Code generation. And Codium, after GitHub Copilot, I think Codium was the first one that gained a lot of traction, right? So developers were swearing by it in the sense that as an AI code gen tool, right? And then after some time, Cursor came along and had an even faster growth rate, right? Cursor went from 0 to 100 million in like 12 months, right? So they got a ton of traction. So, and they eclipsed Codium for a while there, right? And then they started coming neck to neck in terms of the tech, and people, I mean, I heard developers say that they prefer one over the other for different things, right? But point, Codium got acquired for $3 billion, right, by OpenAI, and Cursor just raised they raised, I don't know, but they raised 800. I don't remember the number, how much they raised, but they raised at a $9 billion valuation. Right. So their valuation was about 3x of what was OpenAI paid for Codium, right? So why does this matter now, this acquisition? So we have the head of applications, the new hire. We see them investing or buying over Codium/Windsurf. So what this potentially suggests is that OpenAI is having an increased focus on applications, essentially, right? So maybe they're going to do a separate, like double, push the pedal on building a code gen sort of tool, because they are behind Anthropic. Generally, the word on the street is that if you're coding, then you can use Anthropic. They are much better. Claude is much better at generating code compared to OpenAI, right? So this acquisition potentially could tilt things in the other direction, right? So that's one application use case. The second one, of course, is ChatGPT itself is an application, right, that sits on top of the foundational model. Then you have the App Store, and App Store is something that's not been paid much attention to, really, right? Like we haven't heard much about it at all since the time they announced it, and it's all sort of fairly been under the radar, right? If they start monetizing that or doing things with it, I mean, that might be like a really interesting angle there. So
who's doing the App Store?
ChatGPT has an App Store.
Yeah, I haven't even played with that.
Yeah. They have an App Store. You can go spin up what they call a GPT. You can write your code, right? Like, hey, some code for doing a VMware install or whatever. Like, I mean, I just
and then you build your app, and then they have a store for it.
Yeah, like a storefront. It's not monetized right now.
Right. Okay.
It's not monetized, but as an individual user, then I can go use the GPT that Eric has built,
right,
and install it, and then use that as sort of an overlay on top of when I use ChatGPT, right?
Okay, so it's an AI app.
It's an AI app, exactly.
Yeah, okay,
it is an AI, and it's an AI app store, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we should expect to see potentially increased sort of activity and monetization and focus, right, from some of these players. So I think that is a very interesting angle. Incidentally, the founder of Codium, Varun Mohan, used to be a neighbor of mine several years ago, actually. So that's an interesting connection.
In the Bay Area, your neighbor could be the next billionaire, right? There's no question about that. Everybody's in their garages and they're in their spaces doing stuff.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, Varun is definitely a very bright kid. I mean, went to MIT, and so.
There is that. Yeah. Plenty of MIT kids around.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Even Cursor is also MIT folks, so it's interesting. So both the code gen tools that have actually picked up speed and have shown amazing traction are all ex-MIT alum. Actually.
Well, I think if we want to look at the size of the app market space, right? Software apps, right? They're big, right? It's like billions and billions of dollars, right?
Sure,
and so, as AI is able to generate code,
right?
Soon they're able to generate apps, right? And the code market it's app acceleration right now, right? But when does it become the apps themselves, right? When do you just, like right now, ChatGPT is going to replace Google, right? There's no question about it. Right? Like as people use it and starting to realize that the results are just better, you're just going to go to ChatGPT, right? It'll take time because everybody has to learn the new URL and remember to go to ChatGPT instead of Google. But then you use it and you're like, okay. And I could see where AI will then start replacing apps, right? as you're engaging with your bank, right? Comes back to agents, right? Right now I log into my bank's URL and I, ask it about my balance, and then I tell it to pay my credit card, and I do various banking activities. But over time, that's going to have an AI do it.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think one important thing sort of we should chat for a couple of minutes here is personalization, right? So ChatGPT, if you chat with it for a sufficient long period of time, it begins to understand you. If memory is turned on in the settings, right, it really begins to understand your context. So any new question you ask is always answered in the context that it already knows.
Right.
And that is super powerful, right? And now they've launched integration, for example, Google Drive and with Microsoft OneDrive, for example, right?
Right.
That's access to data right there. And I mean, there's a whole host of privacy issues, which I'm hoping, they've thought through. But once they have access to that data, right, it can answer in the context of your internal data too, right? So there's some really amazing possibilities, right? And all of those speak to some agent use cases, of course. And agents equal applications, right? In the SaaS world, right? Yeah, we thought of applications, and I think in the AI world, the application equivalent is basically agents, right? And it could be one agent, it could be a cohort of agents, right? A swarm of agents, if you will, that's going out and executing things.
So, and you can even see, and I'll just put my interview hat on, PipeIQ and agents and integrated into the ChatGPT App Store, right? Where
absolutely
it just goes, okay, hey, do you want to enable your PipeIQ agent, right? Or your PipeIQ, piece, and whatever you want to call that. And then it's just helping move sales, right?
Absolutely. So, I mean, so we actually have an app that we built actually maybe a year or two ago that we have in the App Store. We haven't really updated it, but PipeIQ, if you actually use the application, right, it is actually using a bunch of agents in the background, right, all orchestrated together. So when you ask a question, it goes to basically a supervisor agent, so to speak, and that supervisor figures out, okay, what is the context of this question, what does the user want, and then goes and executes it and calls the right agents, right, sub agents, and then those agents then call certain tools, and those tools go to execute certain things. Maybe some of them are MCP servers, right? They call those servers, comes back, and then delivers the answer to you, right? And there could be multiple tool calls, not just one, or multiple agent calls that happen before the answer comes to you. So it's actually an amazing setup, honestly. And I feel fortunate that we are sort of at the cutting edge there, right there. We also have a MCP server already running. We're implementing a couple more. So I'm definitely bullish on this whole framework, should I say, on how things are evolving. And that actually brings up MCP. So I think in our previous episode, we had spoken a little bit about MCP, right, Eric, if you remember, right? Sure. Model Context Protocol.
Yep.
Since the last time we spoke, I think, so Model Context Protocol came out of Anthropic, right? Back in December 24, against
who's funding Anthropic, just to be sure?
I think AWS is one of the investors. I don't remember the other ones, but AWS is definitely.
Who's Facebook doing? I think Zuckerberg's doing one of them too.
Llama is their family of models, right? Open source, right? So Zuck has taken the open source approach.
Okay.
And they have released a family of models, but they announced last week actually that they're going to do a ChatGPT equivalent, basically, which is a hosted chat interface for people to go to, right?
Who's doing that?
Facebook.
Oh, really? Okay.
So well, I guess Meta.
Meta.
So Meta one was their open source strategy. They released the Llama family of models. Then they took those same models as a backend for web, for WhatsApp and Instagram. So like on WhatsApp, you can search and then it pings those models, comes back with data answers. So that's been 1 and 2, right? Kind of 2 prongs, integrating AI into the existing applications that they have. And of course, they have access to billions of users. So now the third prong of that strategy now, I guess, to catch up with OpenAI, I guess, I don't know, is an entirely new chat interface, essentially. So I don't know where it's going to be hosted, so to speak, in the sense hosted meaning what is it going to be called? Is it in Facebook? Or, right? Where does it sit?
On WhatsApp.
Right? On WhatsApp, yeah. So that's going to be interesting. So I digress there a little bit. But
yeah, you did. But
so Model Context Protocol came out of Anthropic. And now Google, in the last 3-4 weeks, they released what they're calling A2A, agent-to-agent protocol. And
this is going to compete against MCP then.
yeah, potentially. It's not a head-to-head, looks like. I mean, somebody characterized it as like a Docker versus Kubernetes kind of conversation. So A2A being more like, hey, you have multiple agents you're orchestrating, while MCP is sort of sitting a subset of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not entirely clear. I don't think people are. It's probably a competitive sort of scenario, right? And A2A, of course, works nicely in the Gemini, in the Google environment, Google Vertex, and if you use that. MCP is more open, right? But I think just the MCP and A2A, right? I mean, those kind of frameworks have a huge implication on data gravity for sure, because what like a MCP protocol essentially means is that your data doesn't need to move. I'm going to use the LLM to make the calls I need, get the answers I need. Is really, I mean, how it's going to work is my understanding. And you can have, right, everything can be an MCP server. You go get the data, come back. You got to get the answers that you want and come back, and maybe the pieces of data that you want. So, but overall, the data stays where it is. At least that's my impression really here, right? And that's going to be an interesting sort of frame of reference for, I mean, how things are going to go move forward.
Right.
So well,
it'll be interesting. I'd like to get somebody on from Citibank in here just to talk about how large enterprises are going to take advantage of this, right? Because they have, I think, 1,000 different applications, right? That they're working on, right? Yeah, that they have. I think I saw the number some point, right? And then they have to look at like how are they going to build agents for all these, right? How are they going to build an AI strategy for application replacement, right? And hear how they're choosing frameworks, right? Because this is basically a framework that you're going to choose, right? MCP or the new one from
Google agent to agent, A2A, yeah.
And Google's good at that. They big enterprises, and they're coming back with some software solutions to allow you to do this, right? So getting some enterprises in to say like, hey, what are you considering? What are the bake-off elements for these type of solutions?
Very, very good point. Very good point, Eric. I mean, because I think my understanding is MCP doesn't really have strong security protocols, etc. yet, right? It's not been developed. So for enterprise, of course, that's a no-go right off the bat as of now, right? Because it's fairly new. So a lot of these enterprises, my understanding is they wait and watch and take their time in terms of how quickly they bring this on, right? So it is definitely going to be interesting how they're going to adopt this. But one interesting thing talking about enterprises is HubSpot, which we can think of it as an application, which is an application, but a large company, right? So they released an MCP server, actually.
Oh, nice. So HubSpot mostly did models, right? Go get your model.
No. HubSpot CRM CRM marketing automation, right? Automation sort of platform. Maybe as dominant as Salesforce, right?
Who's the one that's the model distribution? The main AI model.
Oh, Hugging Face.
Hugging Face. I was thinking
you're thinking Hugging Face.
HubSpace versus Hugging Face. Okay, got it.
Yeah, that's Hugging Face. Hugging Face.
What is HubSpot doing here then?
No, so Dharmesh Shah, who is the founder of HubSpot, he's doing something else right now. But anyway, he's closely involved even now. So he is big on MCP, and he posts about it on LinkedIn as well. What is HubSpot doing here? Well,
no, I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to aggregate up their data, right, and deliver it as AI.
Exactly, deliver it as an MCP, right? Because MCP, right, like data as a service, sort of, so to speak, so that other tools, other platforms can integrate with that data or call that data, right? So it's an important development, right? Like I'm hoping Salesforce will announce something like this soon. The disadvantage, I mean, we wanted to use it actually. They just released it yesterday or day before. The problem is it's just only for Java, and PipeIQ, everything is built on Python. So we are not able to kind of leverage that MCP server right now, but waiting to see how quickly they'll release on Python. But yeah, so it is an important strategic move for them, right? So that other apps can then use their data versus, so for example, PipeIQ, if it plugs into HubSpot, right? If one of my users has HubSpot, then I go pull the data from there via the MCP server instead of telling the user, hey, do you think you can pull some of those leads and accounts that you have and put it in our system, right? But in which situation HubSpot loses their leverage, right? So again, it's a question of data gravity in some ways.
Yep.
So there's a big incentive for applications to definitely MCP-fy their stack.
Fighting over the data. Right. Everybody says that. You hear about that, but now if you're starting to think about integrating your data into an AI, right? Through MCP or whatever, then all of a sudden the fight is very real.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think, I mean, for AI applications, really, the idea is how can I insert myself before the data goes into the system of record, actually, and the system of record being HubSpot or Salesforce,
right?
In the marketing context and sales context, right? So that's a very interesting kind of paradigm framework here, right? Incumbents versus AI first companies. So it's going to be super interesting. Yeah.
Speaking of data, right? 23andMe, who gets your DNA, right?
Right.
They announced bankruptcy,
right?
They came out of bankruptcy. Now they go back into bankruptcy, and the chatter on the news sites is like, hey, did you go remove your DNA profile on 23andMe because they're going to sell it in the small print. They can sell that data as well. So
oh my God.
Imagine if you have an AI that's connected to all the DNA, so you could ask, what's Eric going to die of, and they'll be able to tell you, oh, Eric Nielsen, don't worry about him, he's going to die at 68 because he's got this genetic disease, right? So your data is important, even something as simple as that, right? So now some of the stuff gets ahead of its skis, right? Where 23andMe was, wow, that's going to be amazing, we're going to know everything about you, and they're going out of business, right? So some of the stuff gets I think, a little bit ahead.
I hope there's some regulatory oversight around that kind of data. I mean, I know there is regulatory oversight around healthcare data, but I don't know where sort of DNA testing falls in that spectrum. I'm not familiar with it, but it is, that's an interesting use case there, Eric.
Yeah. No, I just thought I'd throw it in there, because you reminded me that that was another news item that we went. Oh, there you go. Yeah. So not all great ideas come to pass, right? Or they get a lot of funding and it happens, and then it wanes away.
Yeah. Right? 23andMe. Yeah, I've never followed that space a whole lot, but yeah, it is indeed shocking, actually.
No, this is where I learned that I'm actually not Nordic, even though I'm Eric Nielsen, and I come from Denmark, outside of Copenhagen. It turns out when you do 23andMe, I'm actually more German than I am Danish, because the Danish island that my grandfather lived in was a place called Bornholm, and it's an island out in a water straightway between Denmark and Germany, because Germany's right up on that edge. And I guess the Germans and the Danish fought over this island for 1,000 years. And so if you come from that island, you got a probability that you're going to be more German than Danish, and that is absolutely the case. So
wow,
amazing. So interesting data story, right? And data longevity story, right?
You brought that data point to life for us.
Yeah, I did. No pun intended.
Cool.
But yeah, so that interesting that more acquisitions will be announced as people are figuring out what to do with their data. I was at the Higher Logic conference where they were looking at how to harvest community data. This is Forms. They're a big government forms contractor, and they have online forums, where you ask questions, and they're harvesting that data, and also trying to figure out how to deliver that data to AI engines, right? So everybody that has data is now trying to figure out their AI strategy, data delivery strategy model, right? And then interfaces, to your point, that Google being one of them.
Yeah. I mean, the interface, the MCP protocol, certainly there's the protocol angle. I mean, interfaces, when you mentioned the word interface, for me, I think agent interfaces are going to be super interesting. In fact, LangGraph released something just yesterday, which we are looking at as well, on just how to have human in the loop for agent orchestration. And that's a super interesting area, right? Like what is the level of interaction that a human needs? And, different people want different levels of oversight. Some people want to be on completely autopilot. Some people say, hey, I want a lot of oversight. I want to make sure it's doing the right thing, right? So how do you accommodate both the parties, for example, right? And how do you make sure that, the AI doesn't sort of really go off the guardrails, right? So there's a lot of super interesting questions on the agent front, for sure. So at PipeIQ, we're certainly trying to stay ahead of that and build according to that, right? I mean, it's one thing to just keep track of what's happening in the news, but it's an entirely different thing to actually build against that.
I just want to know, just like the coding company, when you're going to sell everything for $1.4 billion, to OpenAI.
I'll let you know, Eric.
Yeah.
Happens.
That would be great. I'd
Cool.
like that. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, so we've been going for 45 minutes here. Do we have anything else we want to talk about this week?
I think it's good. It's good. I mean, I think I'm super excited. So hopefully now we'll be back here next week. I'm hoping, right?
Yeah. We'll keep recording when we get together and share our thoughts on AI. I got to say that it was good for me to understand the runtime elements of it and compute resource and how to virtualize that compute resource, and the fact that this stuff doesn't run for free. As enterprises spin it all up, there has to be architects. So at this conference, it's usually an admin conference, right? Administrators, but this conference had more architects than admins, right? Like, because architecting AI is a challenge, right?
And that's where not just admin. Yeah,
that's right. So, and if you're sitting at home and you're adminning, you've already been adminning Linux boxes and forever. So everybody knows how to run data centers, right? But when you start talking about AI and then architecting what a good AI infrastructure needs to be, that's difficult, right? And nobody knows quite how to do it.
Correct. Early days,
and it's changing, right? So it is changing.
No, I mean, it's moving extremely fast. I mean, just the fact that the foundation models, how quickly they are being updated and released.
Right.
I mean, we were discussing this yesterday. The thing is, every time there's a model update, your application will behave differently. That there's going to be differences in how it responds. So you got to go test it all over again.
The funny thing is, UC Berkeley has been advertising data scientist degree for the last 5 years or so. And for the last 4 years, I've been like, yeah, that sounds like just a cheap you couldn't make it through engineering, so you're going to do a data scientist degree instead. But let me tell you, the AI wave has made all that legit now, right? Where, you're going to need to know how to connect your data, and AI is going to take advantage of it. And your enterprise, it's going to be an app. To your point today, it's all about apps, and even OpenAI now hires somebody to run apps, right?
Right. No, I mean, I think the way I think about
what was her first name?
FIDJI.
Fiji.
FIDJI.
Yeah, Fiji.
Simo.
We'll just say Fiji.
Fiji. Yeah, Fiji.
So Fiji's running the app space now over at OpenAI.
Right. So
cool.
It'll
be interesting to watch that play
Absolutely. I think we'll probably see some good level of activity over the next couple of months. I'm super excited.
I'm super excited because she's going to reach out and call you and buy PipeIQ for $1 billion, and
that'll be a good.
I don't own any stock, but I'm neutral in this game, but. I'll be happy for you.
I'll treat you to a nice dinner.
Nice dinner. I appreciate it. That'd be awesome.
All right,
Rajesh.
Okay.
Thanks for hanging out with me for another hour.
Okay. Good talking to you, Eric. Talk soon. Thanks.